My name is Julie Thomas, and as you heard, Toda. I'm married to a Japanese guy. I work for a commercial film production company in Tokyo called AOI Pro. So before I actually bring our special guest on stage, I wanted to tell you kind of a funny story. And maybe you already know this story, but it kind of sets the tone for what we're going to talk about. Okay, so the year is 1994. And there's this guy, maybe you know him, named Jimmy. Who knows Jimmy? Jimmy Lamb, yes. Okay, so he had the honor of being asked to be on the jury in Cannes. And so he would be the first Hong Kongese person to be on the jury in Cannes. So he goes there, and this is before the internet, so you have to kind of like imagine this happening. And in the old days, they used to have this huge book in Cannes. It was like bigger than a telephone book. And so he flips through the book, and he sees his name, but he notices that the photo's wrong. And he's like, what? That's not my photo. And so he flips through, and he sees his photo on a different guy's name. And that other guy is the other founder of ADFEST, Vinette. But so these two Asian guys, they meet in Cannes, and they get a big laugh out of the fact that these organizers mixed up the two photos of the Asian guys. Don't you think that's kind of like funny? So these two guys, they start talking like, wouldn't it be great if there was a festival that celebrated Asian creativity, something that was uniquely for our region? And that's where ADFEST began. So in 1994, they meet, and in 1998 is when the first ADFEST took place. Kind of cool story, don't you think? So, film craft, that's what we're here to talk about today. So, film craft for ADFEST started in 2005. Now, remember the beginning of this story, Cannes? You know, everyone dreams of winning a gold lion in Cannes. What year do you think they started Filmcraft, honoring Filmcraft? Not until 2010. So ADFEST saw that Filmcraft is so incredibly important into how we tell stories and how the advertising looks for our region. So I think that was pretty cool. Now, Filmcraft. Some people get these categories mixed up, because there's the film category and then there's the film craft category. The big difference is that film is about the idea, where film craft is about the execution. I thought it might be easier to explain this, because I'm sure there's a lot of clients out there and agency people, and you guys always concentrate on the idea, and sometimes film craft comes second. And yet, you could have a two-dimensional idea that might look good on paper, but there's no craft when you try to bring it to life. That's, to me, the most important thing. It can take a stale-looking idea and make it look awesome. So, film craft. There's 15 categories here at ADFEST, and I thought that we should quickly just go through them so that you guys can understand. Directing, editing, cinematography, special effects in camera, special effects, digital visual effects, complicated to say all these, animation, production design, costume design, casting, use of talent or celebrity, which we all know in Asia is very popular, script, original music score, best use of music track, sound design, and did you know there's a new category this year? Color grading. I mean, how many people in the audience actually knows what color grading means? Can you just raise your hand? Okay, over half of you don't, and yet it's so important. So I'm really happy that ADFEST has added this new craft category, and to honor that. So what is Asian film craft? I mean, if you look at what countries are eligible to submit work to ADFEST, take a look at that map. I mean, that's a huge chunk of the world, from Russia all the way down to New Zealand. And yet, all of these countries are so different from each other. You know, not only culturally, but economically, What else are they different? Just racially. There's so many differences that it's hard to just lump them all into one region as being Asia. But that's what this festival is, honoring, is Asian creativity and Asian film craft. Okay, so now to get to the core of this session. Beyond culture, what influences film craft? I've always been very fascinated by this, because when I watch TV in Japan, and everything looks the same, and then suddenly something different comes up, and you don't know what it is, but it just doesn't look like the other Japanese commercials. And when I would deal with the advertising agencies, they would say, 海外っぽい, which means like an international look, a foreign look. That's what we want, So, but what does that mean? So I've been asking different directors and filmmakers over all these years. I've been in Japan now for 28 years. But today I wanted to share this insight and have a discussion with 3 very talented filmmakers. And I've chosen these 3 directors because they come from very different regions. So let me introduce to you each one of them. First, Karina Taira. She began her career as a fashion photographer and now directing. Now what's unique about Karina is that she's Japanese, but born in America. Both of her parents are full-on Japanese people. So they've raised her with that Japanese mindset. And yet now she calls Paris and Milan her home. So she has a very international view of the world. Next we have Sling-san. Sling is Malaysian Chinese. So she was born and raised in Malaysia, but her mother's from Singapore and her father's like Malaysian Chinese. But she spent quite a bit of time in Singapore. Now their countries right next to each other, and yet their type of advertising is very different. And so I wanted to hear from her, like, what makes these different countries so close by look so different? Then finally we have Aki Mizutani. Now Aki-san, she's born and raised in Japan, full-on Japanese girl. But she began her career in America, in LA specifically, as an editor. And she came back to Japan about 7 years ago, and her husband actually run the main Cutter studio in Tokyo. And a lot of agencies choose them because of this international look. But what is that? What is this international look? So, ladies, will you come with me up on stage? Thank you guys for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What I'd like to do is that question that I just asked everyone, and I ask myself constantly, is there such a thing as an international looking ad? I mean, if you're watching TV, I'm going to start with you, Sling, Sling-san. When you're watching TV in Malaysia, is there something that stands out that tells you right off, that's not a Malaysian director? What is it?
Yeah, I guess when people say, oh, this ad look international, I think international is like a synonym for like high production quality. Maybe it looks a lot more cinematic. Even, the look of it, the location and all that. So it's something that's worthy to stand on the world stage when you will call it international. It looks international. So we do have cinematic stuff in Malaysia, but the thing is that what's made for Malaysia will look Malaysia. You will use Malaysia cast, you will use Malaysia location, and we also have rules like you can't show your armpit or your dress has to be longer than knee length. So anything that we see that doesn't answer this requirement, we know is probably made out of Malaysia. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Aki-san.
Yes.
What do you think?
The first thing I would notice would be color grading, which is another subject of this panel.
Yes.
So the color is looking very differently. And actually, as we run the color grading as well, we often asked, they want the international look. 海外風のカラー、これが欲しい?
Yes.
Yes. So that's significantly different. And another thing I would say is Japanese, not only Japanese, but the Asian advertisement speaks loud in a lot of aspects, not just music or just the casting, but a lot of layers. But in other hand, the Western advertisement speaks more subtle. They chosen to be subtle.
In
That's-
Western advertising.
Yes.
Now, what's your definition of Western advertising?
Oh, okay. So I have very vague definition, but US and Europe.
US and Europe? For me, I would include New Zealand and Australia, actually. But that's part of Asia. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of make it vague.
Okay, so Karina, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I would say in general, there's always an overall mood that you get when you see a commercial. You say, oh, that's not from here. And I think it comes from color grading as well, to the kind of casting you have, to the way you show a person. Even for me, I'm from beauty, so the kind of woman we show, the way we show her sensuality or the body language. There's so many different elements, even camera movement. I think all those elements of film craft create a certain look that make it look like it's from a certain country.
So you started your career as a fashion photographer, and then you moved into directing, and your specialty is beauty.
Right.
Okay.
I shoot a lot in all different countries, in the US, in Asia, and also in France, Europe. And doing beauty, you have a very different sense of lighting, skin tone, the way you show women.
I also noticed that, like for instance, Asia is way more conservative, and then in America, it's someone that everyone can relate to.
Exactly. So in America, it's all about the girl next doors. I always get this comment when I work in the US. I always have to adjust my personal sensibility because I work so much in Europe. So when I go to the US, I think they say to me, okay, Karina, we need the woman in Kansas next doors to feel comfortable with this woman. So she needs to feel like she can relate to that. So always we have to kind of, take it down a notch or make it a little more relatable, where in Europe, the idea is to glorify women and make everyone dream. So in that sense, in terms of direction, photography, even filmmaking, I do notice a huge difference, even though now the trend is to be more approachable, more real, etc. But there's still those elements I feel that influence every job. So I find myself readjusting per country when we do a job. And I was telling you about this job I did for chocolate.
Yeah.
I did a worldwide Lindt campaign in Germany, and the client was German, and they kept saying, oh, make sure you don't show too much skin. When she eats the chocolate, please, not so sensual. Make sure we don't show too much of the mouth or the teeth, etc. And the next week, I was shooting a chocolate commercial in Italy for Perugino Nero. And when I was having the girl eat, the client kept saying, please, we want it more sensual, keep it more intense. And they said, more. And these are also female clients, and they were really into it. And they said, and at some point, I just kept going, and they were cheering, like, yeah, we love it. So
Can you demonstrate? No. I'm just joking. Okay.
I do adjust myself per country, and sometimes when I am coming back from Asia and go back to France or Italy, I find myself staying conservative in the beginning, and then people are saying, even for styling, they said, oh, but we want to see the form of the woman more. Can we have like backless? Totally, let's celebrate her figure. And so you need to adjust each time. And I think that comes again from culture, because the French culture is more about, they're more open to sensuality, and even the language is more sensual. So I think all those little elements affect, even the language, like English language, it's very to the point. It's very succinct, like duck, duck, duck.
Yeah.
Where in French, it's a little more fluid. Italian, it's a little more dramatic. I find that the language also affects how we see the world, and also how we show something, or how we show women, or how we express ourselves.
Interesting. Okay. Casting. Now, this is something that I want to ask Sling about, because, as we had said, you do work for a lot of different Asian countries, not only Malaysia, but also Singapore and Thailand and Vietnam. You recently did a
Yeah.
in Vietnam as well. And so can you tell us a little bit about the casting?
I do think that the choice of cast, the choice of talent has to do with the characteristic of the country. First off, Singapore will be like fast, efficient, they want to see results and all that. And for Malaysia, we kind of have different races and different group in Malaysia, and each group is distinctly different. So when we make an ad, we need to make sure that it is generic enough, everybody understand. So we tend to be a bit more straightforward. So if we're making a funny ad, we go with a funny actor. So, and for Thailand, I think Thai people they're very comfortable with their own identity. They're very comfortable with their joke. So they tend to be a bit bolder, braver when they're selecting the cast. But I think they're bold enough to use someone that looks different.
Yeah.
And I think you can see the result is much more interesting, yeah.
Well, thank you. Now, Aki-san, because we are, it's already 4 minutes left. Ah, okay. Now, what about editing? Okay, because you began your career as an editor, but now you're a director and editing, are there any differences that you can spot? Like when you look at an edit, you go, oh my gosh, that's totally foreign editor, or I don't know, Japanese editor.
Okay, so in the United States, the main format was for the TV was always like 30 seconds, sometimes 6 seconds, but the 15 seconds is not the main platform. Versus in Japan, it's a 15-second commercial is the mainstream. So the difference is in the US market, we have a time to tell the story in the 30 seconds. 30 seconds allow us to do that. But
So more storytelling.
more storytelling versus in Japan, in 15 seconds, it's really hard to tell the story. So we often go more like idea or more visual. So not the storytelling, but we rely on the power of idea or power of visual impact. So that's what I'm thinking. Also, the editorial process, usually the agency picks editor. Agency picks in the US. In the US, agency picks editor, agency picks color grading, and the sound designer, the composer, versus other outside of the US, it's very direct. So the director picks editor to who is the finisher until the delivery, and the director gets involved through the process until the delivery. That's a huge difference. So it's a huge rely on the power of director outside of the United States.
Yeah.
Yes. And also offline editorial is a try and error process in the United States. I don't know about Europe, but we have time, we have plenty of time to do like recreating or test what is the best editing. So, but versus in Japan, we pretty much edit towards the storyboard because that is more like promising to the client what we are going to deliver. We do, of course, the adjustments, some trial, but it's not like, we don't do from the scratch. So in Japan, it's like we want to make everything so perfect, so perfectly explained. We don't want to leave anything unclear. That's, I think, more Asian. But versus in the United States, we kind of, we are okay to leave the room for the audience's imagination. That's another difference.
For me, I think the element of sound design and music is also incredibly different, I think, in Japan versus America or other places in the world. Is there anything you can say about that?
As I said, Asian ad speaks loud. That includes the music type. And versus the US, everything can be subtle because we can read the room for the audience to how they receive it. But in Japan, we need to present please watch this way, you know? That's, we want to make it clear.
So now we can talk about color grading, because this is a new category in the film craft category. So shall we start with you, Karina?
Sure.
Now, what are some obvious things
Well,
that you can say about the
yeah.
importance of color grading?
I mean, color grading is hugely important, and also it changes so tremendously from country to country that I've worked in. For example, I worked in India quite a lot,
Yeah.
and also culturally they embrace color, and everything is about colors that pop. They even have the color festival. All the women dress in saris with beautiful colors. So I found that when I did a commercial in India and did the color grading, I had to really try to bring the color back into my world. But then I found that the clients later, they would complain because it was too desaturated or not popping enough. So we found that we always had to kind of find a happy balance between the two cultures. Or in Europe, we have a tendency to make everything more desaturated, a little moodier, a little more powdery. So that's more the aesthetic there. And in the US, I found they love really crunchy images. The blacks are much darker. Things are much warmer than what we do in Europe. So I find that I have to adjust per country, but then they kind of want your stamp. So you try to find a nice middle ground that can help them take it towards a certain modernity, but keeping in mind things that work in that certain culture, basically.
So Sling, what do you think?
I think Karina's observation is quite close. For Asia, we tend to still want it to be kind of saturated. Yeah, that's why when we're grading, sometimes we want to kind of imitate what European is doing, because for us that is more forward. So we kind of desaturate a bit and this and that, but client will be commenting on, oh, the skin tone, it looks dead, the skin tone is too dull, or maybe the person is eating the fast food, is a piece of chicken, they will want us to make the color pops. So they kind of make use of color grading to want to bring out the products, like maybe is a softener, but they want to make sure the pink is pop, stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. Aki-san?
Yes.
Aki.
Yes. Asia, I think the client want the brighter rather than darker and in shadow. So I always thinking, because why it is happening is, in Japan, we live in the what's
Fluorescent. Fluorescent
light.
Fluorescent
Yeah.
keikoto, fluorescent
Yes.
light. Versus in Europe,
Tungsten.
that's
Yeah.
tungsten.
Yeah.
The fluorescent is
Halogen.
hated so badly,
Exactly.
So we have, but we Japanese are very used to live in the white, bright lighting, and probably that affects the color grading that we think, brighter is better.
Right.
And also I feel like culturally in Japan, there's a tendency to embrace color. Like even if you look at the kimono, and the way we combine colors is very different from how colors combined even in Europe. There's always that Japanese sense of color where we mix it in a different
Very
way,
harmony,
and the strong
yeah.
combination is considered beautiful. So I think that also affects how we create images as well.
No, but there'll be times that we've been in a telecine session and they will, Japanese directors hire foreign colorists to work on their films because it does have a different look.
Yeah.
And you wonder, why? What is it? Is it the amount of contrast? Is it the amount of saturation levels? I mean, what makes it look so different? And I wrote this. I think the press had asked me a few questions, and I kind of thought of it as because they are so used to having the light in the corner, and they're not used to such bright lights, so that they find that more pleasing to maybe their lighter-eyed color. I don't know. For me, it's like if you go out in the bright sunshine, you want to stick sunglasses on. But in Japan, they could easily go out in the bright sunshine. It doesn't hurt their eyes.
At least in Europe also there's a tendency to want to keep mystery, ambiance, keep it more cinematographic. So we also, in certain kinds of ads, you embrace that kind of look where I think if you're trying to sell to maybe a younger generation, of course, the more millennial, I think anything more millennial is more pop, more color. So I think also in terms of marketing, it's where do you want to go, where do you target to, and then how do you adjust the color palette to that as well.
Yeah. I don't, also grain. When you get into your color correction, you know, a lot of the colorists are very, you know, good with playing with the grain to make it look more cinematic, or, you know, have even though it was filmed on this lens, with their magic, they can make it appear as if it was filmed on a different lens. To some degree. To the regular average Joe, you wouldn't know, you know, that it was filmed on a different lens. But anyway, thank you, ladies. I think we've used up our 10 minutes. And thank you all for coming. I think the most important point that I wanted to stress with this session here is that film craft is so incredibly important to making your ideas come to life. And if you can educate your clients and the agency level to appreciate film craft, I mean, we'll be, you know, I think on the international stage in Cannes, where there'll be more filmmakers, you know, that are being honored in Cannes for their craft. Okay, thank you so much for coming.